The sun had barely risen over Chicago when I felt that inexplicable urge. It was as if a silent voice whispered in my heart, "It's time to fast." Sitting on the balcony of my apartment in Beverly Hills, I watched the city wake up while holding an untouched cup of coffee. My name is Emily Johnson, half American, and at that moment, at 35 years old, I had no idea I was about to embark on the most extraordinary journey of my life. "Have you lost your mind, Emily?" The voice of Olivia, my best friend and partner at the psychology clinic, echoed through the phone. 7 days without eating, isn't that dangerous? I smiled, twisting the ring on my finger, a nervous habit I'd developed since my divorce 2 years ago. "Liv, you won't believe it, but it's like something greater is calling me to do this." "Greater like God?" she asked, with that tone of hers, half skeptical, half curious, that she always used when the topic was spirituality. "I can't explain it," I replied, watching a hummingbird dance near the orchids I grew on the balcony. "I just know I need to do this." The truth is, my life was at a peculiar moment. As a psychotherapist, I spent my days helping people find meaning in their lives, but lately, I felt an inexplicable emptiness in my own chest. The divorce from Richard had left deeper scars than I admitted, and my relationship with spirituality, once so strong in my childhood when I attended church with my American mother, had become something distant and hazy. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in an experience that challenged everything I knew about myself. The fast began on a Monday, September 5th, 2023. Only water. No coffee, my daily fuel, no rice cakes that Mrs. Clara, my secretary, always brought in still warm. In the morning, on the third day, something began to change. It was as if a veil was being lifted from my eyes. The sounds of the city seemed different, sharper, the colors more vibrant. During sessions with my patients, I noticed nuances in their stories that had previously gone unnoticed. "You seem different, Dr. Emily," commented Sophia, a patient I'd been treating for years for chronic anxiety. "There's something in your gaze, a peace I've never seen before." On the night of the 6th day, alone in my apartment, I had an experience that made me question everything I believed about reality and spirituality. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, watching the city lights through the window, when I felt a presence. It wasn't something frightening, quite the opposite. It was a feeling of love so profound that tears began to stream down my face without me even realizing it. "My child," I heard clearly in my heart, "you are ready." At that moment, I didn't understand the meaning of those words. But the next day, when I got into my car to go to the clinic, something inside me knew it would be a different day. What I didn't imagine was that within hours my soul would be ripped from my body in a brutal accident, and I would be taken on a journey beyond the boundaries of life and death. The traffic was particularly heavy that morning on Lake Shore Drive. I remember listening to a soft song on the radio, thinking about how my body had adapted to fasting in a surprising way. That's when it all happened. A car speeding in the wrong direction came straight at me. The driver, who I later found out was drunk, had lost control. I remember the deafening sound of the collision, the world spinning in slow motion, and then darkness. But the darkness was only the beginning. What happened in the next 17 minutes and 23 seconds would change not only my life, but also my understanding of human existence itself and its connection to the divine. And it all began with that inexplicable call to fast, as if God already knew. I would need to be prepared for what was coming. At the moment of impact, I felt no pain. It was as if in an instant all the chaos and noise of the world had been silenced. And then, my journey through the mysteries that separate or unite the world of the living and the celestial realm began. The first moment after the impact was one of surreal clarity. I saw my body trapped in the wreckage of the car as paramedics rushed toward me. But I was no longer there, not really. I hovered above the scene, observing everything with extraordinary lucidity. The most striking thing was that I felt no fear, only a deep and inexplicable peace. "She's in cardiac arrest," I heard one of the rescuers shout, his voice sounding distant as if it came from another world. That's when I realized I was dead, clinically dead, but I had never felt so alive. "Emily!" A soft voice caught my attention. As I turned, I was met with a luminous figure I couldn't fully distinguish. "Come." And so began my journey through the tunnel of light I had heard so much about, but no earthly description could ever do it justice. It wasn't just light, it was love in its purest form, knowledge in its deepest essence. Every movement through that tunnel brought revelations about life, about my own existence. As I moved through it, I began to understand the true meaning of the fast I had undertaken over the past 7 days. It wasn't just a physical deprivation, it was a spiritual preparation. Each day without food had made my spirit more sensitive, more receptive to the divine. "The fast is a bridge," the voice explained as we moved forward, "a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, between the earthly and the celestial." Memories of my life began to pass before my eyes, but not like a fast and confusing movie. They were specific moments, carefully selected, showing patterns I had never noticed before. I saw the moment when, as a child, I prayed with my mother before bed, the simple and pure faith of those moments. Then, the teenage years when I began to question everything, gradually distancing myself from spirituality. The marriage to Richard, which seemed perfect in the eyes of the world, but slowly fell apart due to a lack of deeper connection. "Do you see now?" the voice asked gently. "Every moment of your life was a preparation for this encounter." As we moved through the tunnel, I felt increasingly lighter, more aware. It was as if layers and layers of earthly concerns were being removed from my being. All the fears, anxieties, and doubts I carried, everything was dissolving in the light that surrounded us. Then something extraordinary happened. I began to see other people, or were they souls, also crossing their own tunnels of light. Some seemed scared, others amazed like me. I realized I wasn't alone on this journey, that we were part of something much greater. "The fast you undertook," the voice continued, "wasn't just yours. It was part of a larger movement, a collective preparation happening all over the world." Suddenly I understood why I had felt that inexplicable urge to fast. It wasn't a random decision, but a divine calling. Every sip of water, every moment of weakness overcome, every silent prayer during those 7 days, it all had a greater purpose. "But why me?" I asked, finally finding my own voice in that ethereal space. "Why not you?" The answer came with a tone of affection that reminded me of the unconditional love I felt from my mother. "Every soul has its role in the divine plan. Yours is just beginning to reveal itself." As we approached the end of the tunnel, a deep understanding began to take hold of my being. The fast wasn't just a religious practice or an exercise in self-discipline, it was a way to tune the spirit to the higher frequencies of the universe, to prepare the soul to receive truths that the physical body, in its normal state, couldn't process. Down below, in the physical world, the paramedics were fighting to bring my body back to life. But here, in this dimension of light and truth, I was about to receive revelations that would transform not only my life, but potentially the lives of many others. The tunnel began to open, revealing a scene that no human words could adequately describe. I was about to enter what could only be described as the gates of heaven, and there, waiting for me, was the one who would forever change my understanding of the power of fasting and the connection between the divine and the human. When the tunnel of light fully opened, I found myself before a presence that transcended any human description. It was Jesus, but not as paintings depict him. His presence was simultaneously majestic and welcoming, powerful and gentle. His eyes held all the love in the universe and at the same time seemed to know every detail of my soul. "Emily," he said, and his voice resonated through my being like celestial music, "you fasted not only with your body, but with your soul." The words floated in the air like musical notes, each carrying profound meanings that went far beyond their literal sense. There in that moment, I understood that the fasting I had undertaken had dimensions I had never imagined. "Lord," I managed to say, feeling both incredibly small and completely accepted, "why is fasting so important?" Jesus smiled, and in that smile I saw entire galaxies dancing. "Fasting," he explained, is one of the most powerful keys I have given to humanity, but few understand its true nature. When you fast, your spirit is freed from the bonds of the flesh. It's like tuning a radio to a higher frequency. As he spoke, I saw images forming around us, like a cosmic presentation. I saw people fasting throughout history, prophets, saints, ordinary people, and I could literally see the divine light flowing through them more intensely during their periods of fasting. Do you see those lights? Jesus pointed to what looked like thousands of tiny points of light scattered across the earth. Those are people fasting at this very moment. Each one is like a small tear in the veil that separates the natural from the supernatural, allowing the light of heaven to penetrate the darkness. It was then that he showed me something that took my breath away. Around each fasting person, there was a kind of golden energy field that expanded, affecting not only their own lives, but also the people around them. Fasting is never just individual, Jesus continued. It's like throwing a stone into a lake. The ripples spread far beyond the point of impact. I remembered the changes I had noticed during my own fast, the increased mental clarity, the heightened spiritual sensitivity, the deeper connection with my patients. Yes, he responded to my thoughts, you've started to experience it. But there's so much more. Fasting builds bridges not only between heaven and earth, but also between people. It's a form of love in action. Jesus then showed me something that deeply moved me. I saw Richard, my ex-husband, sitting alone in his apartment, struggling with his own spiritual issues. I saw how my fasting, even without my knowledge, had created a kind of spiritual covering over him as well. True love, Jesus explained, transcends time and space. When you fast with a pure heart, your love becomes a tangible force in the spiritual realm. At that moment, I understood that fasting was not just a religious practice, but a tool for spiritual transformation with practical consequences in the physical world. It was as if every hour without food opened another window to the supernatural. But there is a danger, Jesus warned, his face taking on a more serious expression. Many have turned fasting into an empty practice, a form of spiritual manipulation or a diet disguised as spirituality. True fasting must be born of love and a sincere desire for connection with the divine. As he spoke, he showed me images of people fasting for the wrong reasons, out of vanity, religious obligation, or social pressure. I saw how these fasts, though they still had some physical effect, did not produce the same spiritual impact. What makes the difference, Jesus explained, is the heart behind the fast. When someone fasts with a pure heart, every moment of physical hunger becomes spiritual nourishment for many. It was then that Jesus took me to an even more extraordinary place. It was like a great heavenly hall with walls made of pure light. There, I saw something that would forever change my understanding of the impact of fasting on the spiritual realm. In the heavenly hall, Jesus began to show me what he called the tapestry of fasts. It was like a vast living fabric, where each thread represented a person fasting with genuine purpose. The threads intertwined, forming patterns of light that constantly shifted. "Look," said Jesus, pointing to a specific spot on the tapestry. "This is your fast." I saw a golden thread weaving together with many others, creating a pattern of light that spread far beyond what I could imagine. Each connection represented a life touched, directly or indirectly, by my period of fasting. "But how is this possible?" I asked, amazed. "It was only 7 days." Jesus smiled with infinite patience. "In the spiritual realm, Emily, time does not flow as you know it. 7 days of sincere fasting can generate waves of transformation that span generations." He then showed me something even more astonishing, how fasting literally altered the spiritual atmosphere over places and people. I saw entire regions of the earth where spiritual darkness began to dissipate when people fasted with purpose. Fasting is a declaration of war against the darkness, Jesus explained. When you voluntarily choose to abstain from physical food for spiritual reasons, you are declaring that the spiritual takes precedence over the material. This releases a power that the enemy cannot resist. At that moment, Jesus showed me something that left me particularly struck. I saw how my fasting had affected my psychology clinic. During those 7 days, Without me realizing it, a different atmosphere had settled in the place. Patients, who had struggled with trauma for years, began to experience inexplicable breakthroughs. "Do you see?" Jesus asked, pointing to a specific session I had with a patient during the fast. "When you fast, your words gain a special anointing. They are not just words of human knowledge, but words charged with heavenly power." I then saw how my words, during the fasting period, had literally penetrated deeper into the hearts of my patients. It was as if the fast had created a spiritual force field that amplified the healing power in each session. "Fasting," Jesus continued, "is a form of sacrificial love. When you give up physical food to seek the spiritual, you are telling the universe that there is something more important than your own immediate satisfaction. That releases a power that transcends human understanding." As Jesus spoke, I began to understand why so many people throughout history had experienced profound revelations during periods of fasting. It wasn't just about mental clarity or physical discipline. It was a literal attunement to the frequencies of heaven. "But there's something else you need to know," Jesus said, his expression turning more serious. "The timing of your accident was no coincidence. You needed to be fasting at that specific moment." This revelation caught me off guard. "Why?" I asked, sensing I was about to receive one of the most important revelations. "Because through your testimony, many will understand the true power of fasting, not just as a religious practice, but as a key to unlocking spiritual dimensions that transform physical realities." Jesus then showed me something that left me speechless. I saw people around the world who would be impacted by my testimony. I saw how my near-death experience and the revelations about fasting would awaken a deeper awareness of the connection between the physical and the spiritual. "The fast you undertook," Jesus explained, "was a preparation not only for this encounter, but for the mission you will have upon returning. Every person who hears your testimony will be challenged to rethink their understanding of the power of fasting." The images continued to flow. I saw groups of people gathering to fast together after hearing my story. I saw lives being transformed. I saw spiritual barriers being broken in families and entire communities. The true power of fasting, Jesus concluded, is not just in abstaining from food, but in the release of a spiritual power that can literally rewrite destinies. At that moment, I felt a growing urgency. There was so much to learn, so many revelations to absorb. But something told me that my time there was coming to an end. Jesus noticed my restlessness and smiled with understanding. "Do not worry," he said gently. "What you have learned here will be like a seed planted in your spirit. It will grow and bear fruit in due time." As I absorbed all those revelations about fasting, Jesus led me to a different part of the heavenly realm. It was a place that seemed made of crystalline light, where every surface reflected not just images, but spiritual truths in their purest form. "Emily," Jesus began, his voice carrying a mix of authority and compassion, "you have already understood the power of fasting, but now you need to understand why you specifically were chosen for this revelation." Before us, scenes from my life began to appear, moments I no longer even remembered. I saw myself as a child, praying with pure and innocent faith. I saw the years of studying psychology, the sleepless nights studying human behavior, the tears shed for patients I couldn't fully help. "Your training in psychology was no coincidence," explained Jesus. "You were prepared to be a bridge between the scientific and the spiritual, between the rational and the supernatural." The images shifted, showing my patience over the years. I saw how, even in moments when I felt most uncertain, there was a divine presence guiding my words and actions. "The world is entering a time when the separation between science and spirituality will begin to fade," Jesus continued. "Your testimony will be part of that bridge. Through your experience, many mental health professionals will begin to understand the spiritual dimension of healing." It was then that Jesus showed me something that moved me deeply. I saw a series of conferences and lectures where I would share my experience. I saw doctors, psychologists, and therapists being impacted not only by the account of my near-death experience, but especially by the revelations about the power of fasting. "But Lord," I hesitated, Many won't believe. They'll say it was just a hallucination caused by a lack of oxygen in the brain. Jesus smiled tenderly. Yes, some will doubt, but others will recognize the truth in your words, because the Holy Spirit will testify in their hearts. Do not worry about those who doubt. Focus on those who are ready to receive. At that moment, Jesus showed me something even more astonishing: how my experience would connect to a larger movement of spiritual awakening in the field of mental health. The fasting you experienced, he explained, will be a key for many healthcare professionals to begin integrating spiritual practices into their treatments, not as a replacement for science, but as a powerful complement. The visions continued to flow. I saw therapy groups where fasting would be incorporated as part of the healing process. I saw psychiatrists recommending periods of supervised fasting. For specific cases, I saw a new therapeutic approach emerging from the integration of science and spirituality. But remember, Jesus warned, the power is not in the method but in the heart. Fasting without love is merely food deprivation. Fasting with love is transformation. It was then that I fully understood why I had been chosen for this mission. My background in psychology, my own healing journey after the divorce, even my doubts and questions, everything had been part of the preparation. You will speak to skeptics with understanding, because you have been there yourself, Jesus said. You will speak to believers with wisdom, because you have experienced the power of fasting firsthand. And you will speak to the wounded with compassion, because you know both the pain and the healing. As we conversed in the heavenly realm, I noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere around us. It was as if the air itself was growing denser, more earthly. Jesus noticed my perception and nodded gently. Your time here is almost over, Emily, he said, his voice blending love and determination. But before you return, there are some things you need to understand about the mission that awaits you. With a gesture, Jesus made something appear before us that looked like a living, pulsating map, showing America and then expanding to the entire planet. Points of light of varying intensities shone in various locations. Each of these points represents a person who will be touched by your testimony, Jesus explained. Some directly, others through people who have heard your story. The impact will be like waves in a lake, expanding further and further. I then saw scenes of my future unfolding. Lectures in packed auditoriums, transformative therapy sessions, fasting groups forming in different cities. But what impressed me the most were the intimate scenes, private conversations with people in crisis, moments of prayer with patients, tears shared in moments of spiritual breakthrough. Do not worry about how this will happen, Jesus continued, sensing my budding doubts. The doors will open naturally. Your only responsibility is to share the truth with love and authenticity. It was then that Jesus showed me something that made me understand the true scope of the mission. I saw how each person impacted by my testimony would in turn become a point of light for others. The fasting you experienced, he explained, will be like a seed planted in the hearts of many. Some will reject it, others will save it for a future moment, but many will allow it to grow immediately. The images shifted, showing me the challenges I would face: skepticism from professional colleagues, criticism from traditionalist religious figures, moments of doubt and exhaustion. But alongside each challenge, I also saw the grace that would be granted to me to overcome it. You will not be alone in this mission, Jesus assured. Just as fasting created a bridge to this encounter, it will continue to be a bridge for our constant communication. At that moment, I felt a wave of love so intense that tears began to stream down my face. It was a love that transcended anything I had ever experienced on earth, a love that seemed capable of healing any wound, overcoming any obstacle. This love you are feeling now, Jesus said, is the key to everything. When you share your experience, it will not just be an account of a journey to heaven. It will be a testimony of the love that transforms, heals, and restores. Jesus then showed me something that deeply moved my heart. I saw Richard, my ex-husband, being impacted by my testimony in a unique way. I saw how my experience would be instrumental in his own journey of healing and spiritual discovery. Do you see how everything connects? Jesus asked with a gentle smile. What seemed like a loss in your life will be transformed into an instrument of healing for many, including Richard. As the moment of return approached, I felt a mix of emotions: anxiety for what was to come, sadness at leaving the tangible presence of Jesus, but above all, a deep determination to fulfill the mission entrusted to me. "Remember," said Jesus, his voice now sounding more distant, "the fast you experienced was only the beginning. Each time you fast from now on, it will be a reconnection to this moment, a renewal of the anointing you are receiving now." The atmosphere around us began to change drastically. The heavenly colors, which until then seemed to exist in dimensions beyond the visible spectrum, began to dissolve into more earthly tones. It was as if heaven itself was gently preparing me for my return. "Emily," Jesus said, his voice now carrying a loving urgency, "there is one more thing you need to see before you return." With a gesture, he made a series of scenes appear before us that left me breathless. I saw people in different parts of the world, all connected by an invisible thread of divine purpose. Some were in hospitals, others in offices, and still others in their homes. All of them would be touched in some way by the testimony I was about to bring back. "These are the lives that will be transformed," Jesus explained. "Not just by the story of your near-death experience, but primarily by the revelation of the power of fasting as a bridge between the natural and the supernatural." It was then that I saw something that made me understand the true magnitude of what was happening. I saw how my experience was connected to a larger movement of spiritual awakening that was beginning to sweep the world. "Fasting," Jesus continued, "will be rediscovered in this generation not just as a religious practice, but as a key to unlocking dimensions of healing and restoration that science is only beginning to understand." At that moment, I felt a different vibration course through my entire being. It was as if every cell of my spiritual body was being prepared to carry these revelations back to the physical plane. "The first moments after your return will be crucial," Jesus warned. "Your spirit will be extremely sensitive. You will remember everything, but you will need time to process it. Do not rush." The images around us began to flicker, alternating between the heavenly realm and flashes of my body in the hospital. I could see the doctors still working, the heart monitor showing a flat line, the clock marking exactly 17 minutes since the moment of the accident. "Lord," I asked, feeling a sudden anxiety, "how will I be able to explain all of this? How will I make people understand something so transcendent?" Jesus smiled with infinite understanding. "You will not need to explain everything. The Holy Spirit will testify alongside your words. Those who are ready to receive will receive." It was then that I felt it, a gentle but irresistible force beginning to pull me back. It was as if every second in the heavenly realm was gradually being replaced by earthly sensations: pain, weight, limitation. "Emily," the voice of Jesus now sounded like distant music, "remember, the fasting you experienced has created a permanent channel between your spirit and the heavenly realm. Every time you fast from now on, this connection will be renewed and strengthened." The last images I saw were of people fasting in different parts of the world, each connected by invisible threads of divine light. I then understood that my testimony would be part of a much larger movement of reconnection between heaven and earth. "Your mission," were the last words I heard Jesus say, "is not to convince, but to witness, not to prove, but to share. The rest, I myself will do." And then, in a moment that seemed both eternal and instantaneous, I felt my consciousness being pulled back into my body. The transition was intense, like plunging into icy water after being enveloped in warm light. "We have a pulse." The doctor's voice sounded distant, as if coming through a tunnel. "She's coming back." The first sensation was pain, intense, sharp, real. Then came the weight of the physical body, so different from the lightness I had experienced moments before. I opened my eyes slowly, the fluorescent light of the hospital assaulting my sensitive retinas. "Dr. Emily, can you hear me?" The doctor leaned over me, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "You were in cardiac arrest for over 17 minutes. It's a miracle." Miracle. The word echoed in my mind, now carrying a completely new meaning. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and rough. A nurse approached with a glass of water, but the doctor stopped her. "Not yet," he said. "We need to run some tests first." The following hours were a whirlwind of tests, checks, and medical questions. X-rays, CT scans, electrocardiograms. The doctors seemed determined to understand how I had survived, without brain damage after so long without oxygen. Olivia arrived at the hospital as soon as she found out, her red eyes betraying that she had been crying. "My God, Em," she whispered, holding my hand. "I thought I had lost you." I wanted to tell her everything immediately. The tunnel of light, the encounter with Jesus, the revelations about fasting. But something inside me knew that wasn't the right moment. Jesus' words echoed in my mind, "Don't rush." The days in the hospital turned into a week. The doctors were amazed by my extraordinarily fast recovery, especially considering the severity of the accident. What they didn't know was that every moment of rest became a new revelation. Every dream brought more clarity about the mission I had been given. "You're very lucky," commented Dr. Smith, the neurologist, as he reviewed my latest tests. "Technically, your brain should show signs of damage from the lack of oxygen, but everything is perfect." I smiled, knowing it wasn't luck, it was purpose. During those days of recovery, I began to write everything I had experienced in a journal. Every detail of the heavenly encounter, every revelation about the power of fasting, every nuance of the mission I had received. One afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. Richard, my ex-husband, appeared in the hospital room carrying a bouquet of orchids, my favorite flowers. "I heard about the accident," he said, his voice betraying an emotion I hadn't seen in a long time. I couldn't stop thinking about you." Our meeting was brief but meaningful. I could see in him the changes that Jesus had shown me beginning to manifest. It was as if the accident had created a crack in the wall we had built between us. That night, alone in the hospital room, I reflected on how those 17 minutes and 23 seconds had changed everything. It wasn't just a near-death experience. It was a divine calling, a mission that would transform not only my life, but the lives of countless others. "Your spirit will be extremely sensitive," Jesus had said. And it was true. Every emotion seemed amplified, every intuition sharper. It was as if the veil between the natural and the supernatural had become thinner, more transparent. 3 weeks. After the accident, I returned to work at the clinic. The familiar environment of my office now felt different, more sacred in a way. Every object, every painting on the wall seemed to carry a greater purpose. Mrs. Clara greeted me with tears in her eyes and a tight hug. "Dr. Emily, you have no idea how much I prayed," she said, her voice choked. "Something told me you would come back with a special mission." I smiled, moved by the spiritual intuition of this woman who had lovingly managed the clinic's reception for years. She had no idea how accurate her perception was. My first patient that day was Sophia, the same one who had noticed changes in me during the fasting period. When she walked into the room, her eyes widened. "Dr. Emily," she whispered, "you look different. There's something in your gaze." During the session, I realized that my approach to therapy had subtly changed. The words came with a different clarity, and I could perceive deeper layers in the questions Sophia brought up. "You know," she said at the end of the session, "today was different. For the first time, I feel like I truly understood the root of my anxiety. It's as if you guided me to a deeper place within myself." In the days that followed, I began to gradually implement the changes I knew I needed to make. I started a study group on spirituality and mental health, open to both professionals and interested patients. Olivia, initially skeptical, was surprised by the positive response. "Em, you won't believe it," she told me one afternoon, "but we already have a waiting list for the group, and several colleagues in the field want to join too." It was during one of these meetings that I first shared publicly my near-death experience. The room was packed. Therapists, psychiatrists, patients, all united by a genuine curiosity about the connection between the spiritual and the psychological. "Fasting," I explained, "is not just a religious practice, it's a bridge between dimensions. a way to tune our spirit to higher frequencies of consciousness and healing. To my surprise, instead of skepticism, I encountered extraordinary receptivity. It was as if people were thirsty for that kind of knowledge, for that integration between science and spirituality. Richard began attending the meetings discreetly, always sitting at the back of the room. In his gaze, I could see a mix of fascination and recognition, as if something inside him was awakening. One night, after one of the meetings, he approached. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I need to tell you something. Since your accident, I've started having dreams I can't explain. It's like something is changing inside me." At that moment, I remembered Jesus' words about how my experience would affect Richard. It was extraordinary to see that prophecy unfolding before my eyes. The impact of the work began to spread beyond the walls of the clinic. I received invitations to speak at psychology conferences, medical schools, and centers studying near-death experiences. Each presentation was an opportunity to sow the truths I had received. The integration between the physical and the spiritual, I often said in my lectures, is not only possible, it is essential for a complete understanding of the human being and their potential for healing. 1 year after my near-death experience, I organized a special fasting and healing retreat. The chosen location was a farm in the mountains of Colorado, where the pure air and lush nature created the perfect environment for a deep encounter with the divine. 40 people attended that first retreat, an eclectic mix of healthcare professionals, patients seeking healing, and people simply curious about the connection between fasting and spirituality. Among them, to my surprise, was Richard. "During this retreat," I explained at the opening, "you will not only experience the absence of food, you will discover how fasting can open spiritual doors you didn't even know existed." The days that followed were marked by extraordinary experiences. People reported profound visions, inexplicable emotional healings, and miraculous reconciliations. It was as if the veil between the natural and the supernatural was particularly thin in that place. On the evening of the third day, during a sharing session, Richard asked to speak. His voice trembled slightly as he began, "I've always been a rational, scientific man. When Emily used to talk to me about spirituality during our marriage, I would smile politely, but deep down, I thought it was all imagination. Her accident and what happened afterwards started to change something in me, but these days of fasting, they opened my eyes to a reality I didn't even know existed." Tears streamed freely down his face as he continued, "For the first time in my life, I feel like I understand what I lost when I let my rationality suffocate my spirituality. And I also understand why our marriage didn't work out." The impact of his words reverberated through the room. Many other participants began to share similar experiences of how fasting was revealing profound truths about their lives, their relationships, their choices. On the last night of the retreat, as I watched the group gathered around a bonfire, I had a deep realization. Those 17 minutes and 23 seconds in heaven weren't just about me. They were about all those people and many others who were yet to come. Fasting, I shared with the group, is like a key that opens doors we didn't even know existed. But the most important thing isn't the door itself. It's what we find on the other side. A love so deep, so transformative, that it changes everything we are. In the months that followed, the work continued to expand. The clinic transformed into a center for the study of the integration between psychology and spirituality. We organized more retreats, published research, and developed protocols that combined traditional therapy with spiritual practices. Richard and I developed a new kind of friendship, deeper and more genuine than our marriage had ever been. He became one of the greatest supporters of the work, using his background in psychiatry to help build bridges between traditional medicine and spiritual practices. On a quiet afternoon, as I was organizing notes for my next book about the experience, I received an unexpected message. It was from the driver who had caused my accident. After serving his sentence, he had completely transformed, becoming a counselor for substance abusers. He wanted to meet me to ask for forgiveness. Our meeting was deeply transformative for both of us. I shared with him my experience in heaven and how the accident, which could have been a tragedy, became an instrument of healing for many. Do you see how God writes straight with crooked lines? I said to him, holding his trembling hands. Your mistake was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something much greater. Today, when I look back at those 17 minutes and 23 seconds that changed everything, I feel an indescribable gratitude. The fast that began as a personal search for meaning turned into a movement of healing and transformation that continues to grow. The words of Jesus echo in my heart every day. Fasting is a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, between science and faith, between the human and the divine. And every person who crosses that bridge discovers, in their own way, that the greatest miracles happen when we allow ourselves to go beyond what our eyes can see and our minds can comprehend.